if they're not succeeding and you're not a part of their success, then you're not really doing your job.
My dad, who came from Yugoslavia, who doesn't know anything about technology, he uses ChatGPT. This man thought Amazon was a hoax.
Yeah, so first off, let me just get this straight. You're at a bachelor party, and instead of spending time at the bachelor party, you decide to go to an HVAC and plumbing convention and think about APIs. It sounds like a pretty wild bachelor party.
And we're live. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of The Good Thing. Today we have a very special guest. As always, you know, my co-host Jens, who's here. He's not the special guest, but we have Kevin Swiber. Kevin, did I pronounce that correctly?
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Kevin's joining us over from the West Coast, so it is 6 a.m. for him. Again, thank you so much for joining us so early. We have to have a talk with our content producer so he can make these a little bit easier for guests that join us on the West Coast. But again, thank you so much.
Oh yeah, no, this is fine. Sometimes I like to be awake before the sun is up. You know, I feel like I'm racing it, and then I win.
No, you definitely won today. So Kevin won, Sun 0. So great job on that. And thanks again for joining us. We're really excited today because on The Good Thing, we typically talk about just kind of like technology, what's happening around in the world. And then we really try to focus it back on what we specialize in with APIs. And I don't know, I would say you're probably one of the biggest influencers in the API world. I don't know if you would say that, but for us, we've been following you for a long time. I mean, you have an amazing experience from being the outreach chair at the OpenAPI, from working at Stripe. You have a long history at Postman. So if you want, I mean, introduce yourself to the audience. Kind of tell us a little bit about your history and what brought you into the space of APIs.
Yeah, so I've been in the API space for just over 15 years. Yeah, when I got started in this space, I was doing like software engineering and typical enterprises, and then got into enterprise architecture, and then a while back now. Started interacting with kind of an early API community. Worked on some API standards, uh, and then started working for API product companies. So I went over to Apigee for a while, where we built a gateway, and I did some IoT stuff, and ended up bouncing around to a couple of other startups after that, and then landed at Postman for 5 years. Um, and now I'm sort of working independently, uh, and have a kind of a range of clients that I work with. They give me a really good kind of 360 view of the API space. So I work with enterprises on their API strategy. I work with API product companies on their product strategy and go-to-market strategy. And then I work with investors who are looking to invest in API companies. So yeah, really kind of trying to hit every angle of APIs. And what was really interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about, is a few months ago, sort of all of these personas started talking to me about AI and MCP and how that's impacting the industry. So now a lot of my focus in the last few months has been on MCP.
No, fantastic.
We can now all pack up the APIs. They are not needed anymore. We replace them with MCP.
So you got to do a hard pivot from APIs to MCP.
It's a new age, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I'm curious about a few things. I read on Twitter like some time ago that you wrote API gateways. Did you write the API gateway for Apigee?
So I worked on API gateways for Apigee. We actually had a few. For a brief time, I was managing kind of our main gateway team. And then we had what was called a micro gateway for a while. I was managing that team for a little while as well. And then we had kind of like this separate open source initiative that I was a part of. And I built an API gateway called Argo in Node.js at the time. And that was a little bit more developer friendly. Like instead of doing like config for policies, you did code for policies. And we ended up sort of integrating that into the product at one point. So yeah, I mean, and then sort of post Apigee, went to another company where we built this open source gateway called Express Gateway, which is still out there in the world somewhere. That company is now gone, as startups tend to do sometimes. But yeah.
One thing I'm curious about is you were on the vendor side, and now you're on the consulting side. How is it different to be a vendor in the API space and to be a consultant? Like what's the biggest difference, and how, what kind of did you learn about companies when you switched sides? Because like I worked for Tyke Technologies for a couple of years. Now I'm doing WunderGraph for a couple of years. I'm on the vendor side all the time. And one thing that I learned as a vendor is you don't always see the whole company. For example, oftentimes we interact with the platform team, and the platform team is, I wouldn't say like they shield us, but they are our customer. And the users, like front-end devs, back-end devs, designer, product owner, sometimes we never really interact with them. So I guess if you're on the consulting side, you see the whole space from a different angle. Like what's the biggest difference?
Yeah, well, I think I always saw the vendor side from a slightly different angle because, as I mentioned before, I got into the vendors. I was doing enterprise architecture stuff at enterprises, so I was the person like evaluating the vendors and giving sort of a go or no go on that before joining the vendors. So I always sort of brought that experience into what I was doing. And in my startup days, one reason I like working for startups is that I tend to work cross functionally. So even though I might be doing like engineering management, I'm also working in a pre-sales capacity, doing often consulting with those customers to figure out where their problems are, and what they need. I think when you are in that vendor space, though, it's kind of easy to forget that you're not the center of the customer's world, right? And as I've moved into consulting and now have sort of a bigger picture, when I was at Apigee or Postman, for us, we're thinking like, okay, let's work on this customer. Let's see how we can best provide a solution with our product for this customer. Meanwhile, the customers, got 15 different initiatives going on, and like you're just one of them, right? And
Yeah.
so, I think it's easy to start wondering as a vendor, like, why isn't this person responding to me? We have to move this deal forward. Is it not the right time right now? And trying to avoid things like having a no decision on the deal. And I think it's like really easy to forget that you might get to a no decision on the deal because that person has changing priorities and you're just a small part of their world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well said. And a question from my end. So on this consulting side that you're doing now, working with vendors, you also mentioned with investors, especially now in this, field of AI. Like, what are you currently seeing from your point of view? Like, what are you advising investors on? Is it like on companies that you're seeing? How do you see AI and APIs from an investor's point of view?
Yeah, well, again, the last few months has been a lot of questions about how is AI changing everything? How is it impacting their current investments? Should they be investing more money? Should they be looking at a new round? Should they be advising their portfolio to start doing more with AI or MCP? So I wouldn't say that there has been an anxiety around it, but a curiosity for sure. Um, and I think by the vendors and the startups, I think there's an excitement there as well. I think as a product company, there's always in the back of your mind like, am I going to be irrelevant in the next 5 months? Am I going to be irrelevant in the next year? Um, and so working to stay relevant is an important thing. But yeah, there's certainly, I wouldn't say like there was any panic recently or anything. Um, but even sort of prior to AI and MCP taking off, um, a lot of the concerns were around what is actually still relevant in the API space. Are gateways becoming more commoditized? Is design becoming more important? Is there more opportunity out there to get sort of a larger customer base? What are the different customer portfolios out there between sort of startup, mid-size, enterprise, and what's the the difference in sort of approaching those markets. So I think all that stuff still exists now, but now we're wondering how do we grow our product? How do we stay credible? How do we stay relevant going forward in this new AI space?
You just said what is relevant, but if you turn it around, what would you say, given what LLMs can do today and the trends we're seeing, what would you say what became irrelevant, or what will fade away from now on? Do you have any observation in that direction?
Well, I mean, I tend to think things stay around for a really long time, right? So
Yeah.
even if it's dropping in relevance, it will probably still be around for a long time. There's still plenty of good business to be done in mainframe computing, and and we've largely gone away from that as an industry, right? So, but for some people, mainframe computing is incredibly relevant to their day, right? So I think what's popular is probably a different question. I think you can continue to make tons of money off of all the software that we've built and all of the different technologies we've built over the years. But if you want to stay on a wave of what's popular, that's changing a little bit. I think infrastructure companies are becoming more boring to folks, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think you kind of want your infrastructure to be boring in some ways, but it doesn't always feel good to be like a startup who is trying to get your name out there, and try to get some press and try to get some people who love your product. Doesn't always feel good to think, oh, maybe my stuff is boring, right? um, but as sort of times shift and new exciting things come in the way, I don't think it necessarily means things become irrelevant. It just means the focus is elsewhere for a time.
One observation I made is when you go to TechCrunch or press in general, like you can announce a funding round, or you can announce a crazy thing in AI, and everything else, like, I don't know, if you
Just gets
announce a new
lost.
API standard or something, or I don't know, like there's there was like a Razzo specification or like other things, like in the surrounding AI noise. It's these days it's extremely hard to do anything with APIs or something where people are like, that's interesting. Like, yeah, how do you see that?
Yeah, and I think it's hard as a tech industry as well, because we are kind of on the bleeding edge of things, and like we are early adopters to a lot of different things. And so, from our perspective, sometimes it's like, oh, like the whole industry is moving in this one direction. But if you talk to like, normal people who aren't in tech, people who are just doing their jobs at regular enterprise companies around the world, they don't have 15 Claude code instances running trying to automate their whole lives, right? Like they're just trying to figure out, okay, I'm using Chat GPT. Now my boss wants to use Chat GPT. What does that look like, right? So it's and they don't have a whole, they're not like already planning out a whole ML ops thing internally. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
we are looking at this, and our focus, and even the journalists' focus, tends to be along where kind of the bleeding edge tech folks are. And I don't think it really matches what the regular person is doing out there today.
I think you're
Yeah.
spot on. Like, I was talking to a couple of my buddies. They work at big enterprises, like Fortune 500 companies. I'm like, oh, like, have you heard of Cursor? They're like, what's Cursor? And I'm like, have you heard of Lovable? They're like, what's Lovable? And I'm like, have you heard of ChatGPT? They're like, yeah, we just kind of started using it. And like, these are smart guys, but like, I think what you said is spot on. Like, we're kind of in a bubble, like our own bubble. We're on the bleeding edge. We see this stuff. We see these crazy rounds, these valuations and everything. But when you back up and you go talk to actual normal people, nobody actually sees that stuff, which is, I think you nailed it on the head there.
Yeah,
You
they're
know,
like, did you see that there's a new .NET runtime that released? You know, like that's where they are, and we're like, no, actually, I didn't notice that at all. You know,
It's so
yeah.
interesting. And then go ahead, Jens. I think you had a question.
You know, when I talk to our bigger customers, like bigger enterprises, and we're talking to like an architect or someone, like topics that they are interested in is like they also look at AI and things, and they are using Cursor, like they are modern, but topics they are interested in is things like API governance, like how can we build a robust process to roll out API changes and not break things, and how can we collaborate better, like very like I sometimes feel like there's so much AI noise, and there's fundamentals in the API space that are not yet solved well. Like for example, one big topic we're working a lot on is how can we help people better collaborate on API design, and how to implement APIs, and how to structure them, and best practices, and blueprints, and these kind of things. And I wouldn't exactly say it's like the most exciting topic, but it's a very important problem to solve. And there's not so great tooling to figure out, okay, if we have a microservice landscape of hundreds of services and potentially tens of thousands of REST API endpoints, how can we manage that level of complexity? And you can't just take this whole thing and say like, okay, here's like an LLM, it figures it out. No, that's like, you can't solve every problem with fancy LLM tech. And but from a messaging perspective, these are things where I would say the reality check is schema governance, things like that. This is something enterprise architecture architects think about. And then you have this whole like, hey, I have five cursors running in parallel, and they code generate something. And yeah, for me it's two realities.
yeah, and something that really stuck with me in my enterprise architecture days is this concept of having a priority of people, then process, then technology, right? When we put like the technology first above the rest, we end up in a place like having a bunch of APIs spread out everywhere, a bunch of duplication. Nobody knows what the other person is doing, and we don't even have a good idea of what APIs are out there, right? I work with tons of companies who are like, yeah, so we went to this sort of autonomous teams kind of approach where they got to do the development and the deployment for themselves, and that's kind of worked out. But now we have no visibility into what any of these teams are
Yeah.
doing, and we have 7 address verification APIs, and we're paying vendors on the back end for this, right? Like we've got 3 different vendors for address verification that we have APIs on top of. How do we get out of this mess? And so it's been interesting to kind of take a step back and go to the process and not just look at, oh, let's do microservices everywhere, let's have autonomous teams, but like let's go back to the process of how do we actually launch software here, and how do we get the most out of the investments we've already made, and how do we get kind of a handle on the API sprawl that's happened in our organization, right?
Yeah. You know, this is interesting what you're saying, because for us, like we made I would say we made a super interesting journey on like a fast track, because when we started, it was all about, okay, we want to build something cool with GraphQL. That was like our starting point, and it's a valid
Yeah.
starting point. Like it's fun, it gives you motivation. And then we iterated on that, and we kind of realized developers like our tool, but it is hard to sell it into enterprise. Like for enterprise, there's no sellable unit. Like they like it, and some people use it, but not really enterprise. So we pivoted into federation. And federation, like you have like multiple GraphQL servers, and together they federate, and then you have like a unified thing on a high level. And what that allowed us to do is we were able to get into enterprise accounts where multiple teams wanted to collaborate on creating a GraphQL API. And then we didn't stop there, but we were curious to figure out, like, you know, if you are an ambitious startup, you are looking for not just people who like your tool, but you really want to make an impact. And like, you know, like on a monetary side, you want a fast growing startup, but how do you create a fast growing startup? You really must find a lot of value in the market. You must find value for the customer. So we dig deeper. And if you go beyond GraphQL, if you go beyond federation, if you go beyond API gateways, what we kind of realized, one of the biggest problems our customers have is collaboration. It's working together. It's what you said. It's about people and process. And so we're kind of expanding beyond just the tech. Like we're stepping more and more away from the tech, and we're trying to help people work together better and collaborate better. And also we help them to take their existing processes and optimize them, because we kind of realized that you know, one of the funniest things we realized is when people want to change their APIs, and I explicitly go away from the GraphQL language, but when they try to change their APIs, we ask a bunch, and we realize a lot of our customers, they use Miro boards. They put a screenshot of an application on the Miro board, and then they put post-its on the screenshot side by side to try to articulate what could be the API requirements and such. And then they create gigantic Miro boards with lots of screenshots and post-its all around and try to figure out what could the API be. And then they take these post-its and somehow translate them into other tooling where they actually create APIs from that. And we kind of realized if we want to expand our scope, if we want to bring more value to them, it's actually not so much about API gateways and these kind of things and federation. It's more about how can we help the people and optimize the process of designing and working together and these kind of topics. So that's, I don't know, it clicked for us, and it excites us much more to help the people get something done than just building like a faster gateway or something. So I don't know, our thinking has completely changed. I'm curious what you think about it.
Yeah, it's you know, I think being in this business is super interesting, and I particularly like working for startups. When I went over to Postman, my background had always been in sort of engineering management. But when I went over to Postman, at the time, they had a need for people with like enterprise experience, as they were going to start trying to sell more to enterprises. Um, and so you know, where they really needed help on was in sort of pre-sales and post-sales technical folks, right? So I joined as a solutions engineer, and got to work with people with a bunch of different companies as they were, you know, having struggles with their API programs, trying to figure out kind of broadly with their API programs, not necessarily specifically to Postman, right? Um, and that kind of led to a role where I acted as sort of a field CTO for a while there. And that was hugely rewarding, right? Because after spending so much time with all these different companies and like understanding all of their different problems, then you're in a position to actually talk about that experience and say, here's what I've seen work for these companies. Or, you know, the position that you're in right now, I know it feels like you're alone in this, but you're really not. Like, you know, I've worked with several companies who have been here before, and here are some things that they're trying to ease the pain of these problems that you're experiencing. And that kind of stuff is, not only is it like rewarding for me to do, and I think it's rewarding for a lot of people to do, but it really develops these close customer connections. And like you're really in it to help them succeed, right? Like that's part of the job. If they're not succeeding and you're not a part of their success, then you're not really doing your job, right? So it's well beyond here's a product that I'm building that you're buying and that you're implementing, and more like how do we build these connections that are going to last a long time and be mutually beneficial.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have one question. You mentioned earlier you work with investors. If I'm a venture capitalist, what's your suggestion? What should I invest in? What should I not touch? Like what's your current thinking of the market from an investor's perspective?
That's an interesting question. And I would say it's usually kind of more specific than that. Kind of looking at the entire market through a particular lens. So, uh, if we take gateways, for instance, right? There's a portion of gateways that have really become commoditized over time. And I wouldn't say all of what gateways do, because I think gateway companies actually have platforms for the most part, and they do quite a lot. But once you start seeing Amazon come out with a product through AWS and GCP and Azure all have products for something. These are essentially our utilities. These are essentially the
Yes.
electric company for tech, right? And so this stuff starts to become utility, and they charge utility rates. They charge sort of like usage based for all the different meters that they might have. Uh, and so the what I often say to product companies as well is that and to investors what they're looking for is a company that is credible. So like they've got some experience that means they know what they're talking about. A company that's relevant. They're producing something that people actually want today, and a company that's differentiated. Like you're able to look at them and say, here's what makes them uniquely them, and where they sit in the market. So you could still do all three of those things, and be a gateway company, but you got to understand that there are certain table stakes that are higher now because a certain portion of what you're doing is utility, is commodity, and so you've got to build on top of that, right? Like, so the bar to entry is higher than it used to be, because a portion of this has gone to commodity. So, often when they're evaluating companies, I'm kind of starting with that as a baseline and then saying, oh, here's, the three different ways they differentiate, or looking at the market and saying, like, here's, how these five companies are differentiating in this market.
Oh, that's
If
well
you
said.
if you look at the magic quadrant these days, like if you look at big players like Kong and Apigee and Gravity and others, where where do you see the API space going in terms of vendors? Like, is there like one winner, or is it like iterations or hype cycles, or what's your what's your take on where the magic quadrant is going?
Yeah, well, I mean that's a whole other game, right? With the analysts, and I think I think it's really easy to get jaded by the analyst model. But I think they actually do provide a really good service. And I've worked with analysts from the enterprise architecture perspective. I've worked with analysts from the vendor perspective. And it's a hard job to have like a trusted third party between everyone, right? And a lot of people think it's like, sort of a pay to play thing. As a vendor, you pay them so much money and then you get on the quadrant. And I found that's not necessarily the case. Typically, for folks who are getting on that quadrant, you're going to be bigger anyway, because you're one of the top players in the space. So you're probably going to have like a subscription to Gartner at that point, just because of the size of your company. But they constantly mention sort of smaller companies that
Yeah.
aren't that big, who certainly aren't paying them. And so yeah, I think looking at the quadrant is super helpful for folks who don't have the time and the energy to go really deep into all of these companies, and having a relationship with folks like Gartner or Forrester helps them sort of speed run into the a space that is really complex. You know, the API space is super complex. I always say it's like the most difficult Venn diagram of vendors who are providing services, and some of them overlap. And like trying to figure out which vendors do I purchase to piece together my API program is an incredibly difficult task, because you're going to be buying from three vendors, and maybe they have four things that overlap all three of them, and you've got to choose which vendors you're going to actually adopt for those certain features. And it's incredibly difficult. So I think the Magic Quadrant is, it can be super helpful for folks who kind of know where they sit, where they're like, oh, we always buy kind of the luxury product, right? Like, what is the most luxurious product on here? Well, this one's all the way up and to the right. They're probably the most expensive. Let's go with them. Or there are folks who are like, like we don't want to commit that much. Like, we know that we're kind of early in this. Maybe there's someone over here towards the closer to the bottom left that we should go with. So I think it is helpful. It's certainly not everything. I think you can't look at a Magic Quadrant and know for certain where to go. You still almost kind of need a trusted third party in there to help you out if it's all brand new to you.
I
Yeah.
think that's super
I
well
mean,
said.
one of the big benefits of analysts I see is, let's say you're a CTO of a Fortune 100 company. You want to start an API initiative, and you don't know what is the right thing. You can go to an analyst and say, hey, here's my requirements, what's your recommendation? They give you a short list of 3 vendors, you evaluate them, and that's probably a very good starting point. And if you pick any of the 3, it will probably and be an okay solution. And that's ultimately in that kind of roles, it's also a lot about like risk management. It's not just like making a decision, but not making a bad decision, because it can affect your job. So I think the model makes sense, right?
It's a very fair model. Like, I think I would agree. I mean, Gartner, what they do is they provide you a service just based on like what you said. Like, you do pay to get in it if you are a big company, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be put on the quadrant. The quadrant has rules, and also the analysts stay very fair, which I appreciate. They put smaller vendors into there, they put bigger vendors into there. My question though is, knowing that, and now your background as, I mean, just given your entire experience, but now as a consultant, what are some tools that you recommend if people come to you and they're like, hey, like I'm looking for a gateway, like what are some of the tools that you go top of mind where you're like, hey, I've worked with these 3 or this type, but tools that you recommend in the API space?
Yeah, there are tools that I definitely do not recommend. I don't think should call those folks out necessarily. But I think there are a lot of great tools out there, and I think that there are good open source tools out there as well for folks who want to get started. Typically I look at what their requirements are. If it's just like one small project that they need to stand up and get running, I'll typically do an evaluation between like Con and Tyke, maybe Gravity, who's open source, at least their open source version, and kind of see where that's going to fit for them. Of course, looking at, are their needs going to grow and expand, and what does that look like? A lot of open source projects have vendors associated with them as well. So they have hosted products, they have customer managed products, all sorts of things. What a lot of folks are kind of leaning towards now, especially with kind of cloud deployments, is there's a bit more comfort with having like a centralized control plane that's hosted as a SaaS, and then a distributed data plane that they host themselves. So having all the gateway runtimes run in their own infrastructure essentially, but then doing management of all of those gateways through a centralized place. So, they log into the SaaS and they can set permissions and sort of RBAC stuff for other folks logging in there, and then manage who has sort of control over that. And then there are, folks who are looking for things like a cleaner sort of GitOps approach to it, right? And so there are vendors like Zuplo that serve a particular section of the market really well, and have a decent kind of GitOps flow to them. So I mean, it really depends. I would say there are probably more vendors that I've recommended depending on the specific use cases and the needs of the customer. Um, there's more that I've recommended than there's more that I've said stay away from. You know.
That one's curious, but I'm not going to ask you that one. I'll ask you that one offline. No, it's awesome. But let's kind of acknowledge some of the topics that we had planned, which is Jens says this all the time. I think you also say, and I also wholeheartedly agree on this. It's APIs all the way down. APIs quietly power everything. And one of the things I realized, the space that we're in, I was once at a bachelor party, and in the hotel there was an HVAC and plumbing convention, and there was people going crazy about the type of like angles on the plumbing, the type of material used in the pipes and everything. And I kind of realized like the API space is the plumbing space. Like we're the weird people that get excited about what type of piping we use, how we connect different systems together. So I'm like looking at this conference and I'm walking around and I'm looking at all these booths and everything, and I'm like, oh, this is true. If you think about it, like every physical building in the world has plumbing. Every digital system in the world has plumbing. And so one of the things we all agree on, I think, Kevin, I'd love your take on this, is, I mean, APIs power everything. It's APIs all the way down. Would you agree with that? What's your take on that?
Yeah. So first off, let me just get this straight. You're at a bachelor party, and instead of spending time at the bachelor party, you decide to go to an HVAC and plumbing convention that happens to be in the same venue and think about APIs. That's that's it. Sounds like a pretty wild bachelor party. Um,
If I'm honest, though, I was at the bar. I saw all these people. They were getting super excited. So I got a couple drinks into me and I went into the conference, and it was a little bit more fun like that. But yes, you got that right. I did.
okay. All right.
APIs are always on the top of my mind.
No, it sounds like something that would happen to me too. But like, and then suddenly I was looking at plumbing. Like, how did that happen? But yeah, I mean, I think it's I as much as we've tried to steer away from APIs, and I think even in the GraphQL space, it was almost like, oh, to hell with APIs. I'm going to go use GraphQL, and I think for a lot of those people, it took a while to realize like, oh, this is still an API. Like I still I still have to worry about the network. I still have to, maybe the tools are really great for me client side, but there's still like a whole network here that I've got to think about, right? So we can't escape it, right? Like client server is a really good model. And to do client server, there are a few different patterns, but they all end up looking like APIs, no matter how you slice it. So yeah, I think when we look at kind of AI and MCP now, there are like a group of people who are saying like, oh, I don't need my API anymore. I can just make an MCP server. But then, what happens is you want to centralize this functionality somewhere. You want to provide this functionality to multiple consumers. You've got natural seams where you need to scale separately. And so you're looking at, having a distributed model of some sort. And when you have a distributed model and it's going over the network, suddenly you're building an API that your MCP server is a consumer of, right? And it just every time we say like we're trying to get out of doing APIs, we end up just creating more APIs.
Yeah.
And so like I don't think that's going away. And I think some people are I think they're experiencing the pain of having so many APIs, and so they're like, no more APIs. Like let's just stop doing it. I don't think they can, right? I think like APIs are
Yeah.
here to stay. They're going to keep proliferating, and so doing a better job managing that proliferation is probably the way to go there. But yeah, I think we're never going to get rid of APIs because we live in a connected world, and we have our systems living in the cloud now, and we have a distributed network of applications that we need to talk to. So it's always going to be APIs.
Well
You
said.
you mentioned one point, and it gave me like a curveball. But so you're the creator of Siren. We both know that. Stefan doesn't know what Siren is.
Yeah.
But
Well, for the audience, give the audience a 30-second elevator pitch
yeah,
of Siren.
you can do that, Kevin. But I kind of thought when LLMs became more powerful, and when everybody started talking about MCP, I was immediately reminded by, I thought Hypermedia would have been the right approach to let an agent talk to an API, and the API tells you what other things you could do and then interact. And I thought that's the Hypermedia moment, and it didn't come. Like, well, what do you think about it? And what is Siren again for everybody?
Yeah, so Siren is a hypermedia type. What hypermedia means is having basically links and forms in your API response, so you know what you can travel to next, and you know the actions that you can take. It's defined in the response itself, much like HTML, which is a hypermedia type. So with HTML, you can get links that you can go to the next page. You can get forms that you can submit. When you talk about a Hypermedia API, it's just really presenting that in a way that's more easily consumable by a machine. Um, so when you think of things that are very dynamic coming from the server side, I might not statically know which entities are related to this entity until I do the call at runtime. That's very much where LLM interactions are today. And I think we are actually seeing like some hypermedia elements pop into the scene. We probably won't call it hypermedia anymore, but the patterns, like, we're coming back around to them.
Yeah.
With MCP, there's this whole MCP UI track that's going on right now, where they're talking about how to have like a tool response come back that essentially has forms in it, so you know what to do next. There's like something called elicitation, where you get input from the user. So like we're coming back around to a hypermedia, whether we know it or not, and that's fine. We can pick whatever name we want. I've stopped fighting the name thing a long time ago. You want to call anything REST, call it REST. Have fun. Go for it.
Yeah. No, like it makes sense, well, one thing I'm curious about. Maybe you have an opinion on that, but I think it's actually happening, because if you search in Google now, you have the AI summary, and it
Yeah.
changes user behavior. That's already proven. Like, there's statistics that people stop clicking on links, and I have I personally have a feeling that user behavior will change, in the sense that we open ChatGPT, we ask a question, and maybe it serves the web and does something and presents us something, and you now can add your MCP servers to the chat as well. And I have a feeling that it's possible that the internet, or at least the internet behavior, it somehow changes, that we're no longer, in the beginning, and you're longer in tech than me, but in the early days, you had these registries, or what was it called, like, were sites that had links, like, what was the name, directories or something?
That link aggregators
Yeah.
generically.
So
Yeah.
you went to like a page, and it has links and everything, and so you clicked on the links, and then came Google. Okay, you can search. It takes you to the next pages, and maybe the next iteration is we're abandoning that as well, and we're just asking questions, and then we just get the information back. But at the same time, it also feels a bit like the web becomes like a walled garden again, because we're not exploring the web ourselves. We hand this over to a machine, and ChatGPT decides for us what is relevant or not, what should we see. And I don't know, a lot of people trust what comes back from an LLM, which can also be a mistake. And yeah, how do you think about LLMs, ChatGPT, Claude, all these things? How do you think about changing user behavior and how it affects the internet?
Real quick before you answer that one, Kevin, I just want to add my mom, my dad who came from Yugoslavia, who doesn't know anything about technology, he uses ChatGPT. My wife, like, they've stopped Googling. They just ask ChatGPT and they assume it's correct. It's blown my mind. And my dad, I asked him a question. He's like, I don't know. Let me ChatGPT it. This man thought Amazon was a hoax. So, like, it is absolutely changing user behavior. But I would love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, for sure it is, right? Like, ChatGPT is like one of the biggest consumer products to ever launch, period, right? And what is interesting to me is that the experience almost reminds me of the early web, where things were very information based. The idea was we're sharing information with each other, right? So you have a very plain looking site. Essentially, you're just getting the text, right? And that's what's happening with an LLM. You ask it a question in text, you get a response back in text. At some point, like, we decided, okay, we've got this whole presentation layer that we're providing folks. How can we improve that experience? And so you get into all sorts of cool web design things, sometimes kooky web design things, and you're presenting them with an experience, not just text, right? um, and we've gone really far with that. Some websites look incredible. You can have an incredible experience on that website. When we talk about like LLMs kind of scraping those websites and providing data, we're losing the entire experience of the web that someone has crafted for us. And it's a trade-off that we're making, right? um, so I think it makes information incredibly accessible. We could say that Wikipedia made knowledge and information incredibly accessible, but to make it more of a personalized thing, right? Like the chatbot can learn my style over time. It can know when it needs to ask me to go deeper on a question. Like it can be a very personalized experience for me. I think that is really going to change a lot of things. Where essentially, you want to own the experience instead of giving that experience to someone else to present to you. You want to own the experience yourself. I think there are pros and cons either way. I think I've personally enjoyed the experience of surfing the web and seeing what other people have created, and the
Yeah.
different creative ways they want to present information to me. I don't think it certainly won't go away. That will always be there. Like the web's not going to go away. It's too vast. It's too big. Will a lot change about it? I think so. Um, ad revenue, right? Like ad
Yeah.
revenue became a huge thing. What happens to ad revenue in a chat GPT world? And for the folks who went too far, who were showing me 5 different ads when I'm trying to review an article, you better believe I'd rather go to chat GPT than get spammed with 5 different windows I need to close in order to read an article, right? So I think it's going to help drive better practices there that care more about the user experience. Um, but yeah, it's interesting, like the value that folks are getting from interacting directly with their users, directly with their consumers. That's shifting, and there's now a third party in the mix. And everyone's kind of beholden to that third party. What information are they going to share with me? you know, what information can I present through them back to the user, if anything at all. So I think that there's a lot that we're going to need to think about moving forward. I know a lot of people are like, I just want all chatbot, all chat interface, all natural language experience all the time, because I think they're really excited about it, and because I think they're sick of getting spammed with a bunch of ads. Um, but you know, we lose some stuff there too. So I think, you know, over time we'll start to figure out what this really looks like for us. But certainly there's a shift, there's a change, and we're all going to have to adapt.
It's
Real
it's
quick,
also quite
Jens.
likely that at some point, if we look at what like Netflix and others did, at some point maybe we will just see ads
I was
in
gonna say that.
ChatGPT, and
Yeah.
then you can have like the premium version that might not have ads and it's a bit faster, and the cheap or free version, it shows you an ad before it gives you your text, right? But on another side, I think what's also cool about the coming back to the chat as the interface and just text. I think it has also positive effects on accessibility. Like everybody who had issues using the web in its animated visual form, they can now ask ChatGPT and they can consume it as text, or they can listen to it. So I think there's also like that side. So that's also a thing. One other question I have is, if you think about, we were speaking earlier about like you're consulting to enterprises, and I'm curious in this ChatGPT AI world or LLM world, where in reality, because there's a lot of hype and people who build cool stuff and talk about cool stuff, but if you come from an enterprise angle, where do you see like real market pull for LLM tooling? Like what are the things that enterprises are actually buying and they don't churn? Like what is the stuff that sticks?
Good question.
And in terms of like LLM stuff, I mean,
Yeah.
most folks are just trying to figure out ChatGPT, and their technical teams are starting to investigate things like Cursor, or more commonly, depending on the type of company it is, it'll be them getting started with like a GitHub Copilot, right? Because they're
Yeah.
using VS Code already. I do see people quickly going from Copilot to Cursor, to Windsurf, to like investigating Cursor and Windsurf as soon as they get familiar with Copilot. Um, so I think it's mostly in kind of like the technology team adopting this stuff now, and business folks starting to say, how do I get a chat GPT like experience for the things that I'm asking for. So I think it's very, very early days for you know, more digital native, I guess, companies who weren't around before the web, right? Like you've got companies that are like 300 years old who've been around for a long time, then companies who are 20 years old, or
Yeah.
15 years old. For those newer companies, uh, they are much quicker to adopt AI and MCP that I'm working with now, right? Like they're super early adopters for MCP. They're creating MCP servers. They're figuring out how to have authorization controls and the safest way possible to present it to their business users. Like they're kind of ahead of the curve. And then there are certainly folks who have been doing ML for a really long time. You know, prior to the LLM boom. Um, even big like insurance companies and things like that, mortgage companies, right? Like they have tons of data that they can use for various reasons, and they've been looking into this for a while. So I think there are certainly new technologies in that space that are very interesting to them, that they can leverage. But I would say like there isn't really good in enterprises right now. Anyway, there isn't really good like deep penetration of AI into those enterprises. Smaller companies, right? They'll have they'll have like, AI mandates where like you've got to be using AI in your job. um, some larger companies are starting to hire like chief AI officers
Yeah.
uh, to kind of oversee this, and not just on the technology side either, but like on the business side too. And like they're really just getting started. So all this stuff is brand new. I think we'll be in a much different place in 5 years on the enterprise side. I think on sort of the cutting edge side, we're in a new place every 3 months. So
Well said. Very well said. And Jens, by the way, to your
Uh,
point about the ads thing, I was thinking that exactly when Kevin was saying. I was like, wait till you're on Chat GPT and it's like, while this is loading, please take a look at an ad from our sponsor. And I'm like, oh my God, when is that day gonna come?
yeah, but the difficult part of that is like attribution, right? Like you don't even know where the data came from at that point. And so like there's no money filtering back to the source. It's just OpenAI taking your money at that point, right? And so that
Yeah.
that creates a whole other issue there of, do I try to block the scrapers that are coming to my site, and like Cloudflare's looking at some of this as well. Do I charge? Do I try to charge OpenAI for coming to take my data? Right? There are a lot of things we still need to figure out. There's certainly a lot of ethical things we still need to figure out with AI and biases. So yeah, I think it's gonna be a really long decade of really trying to get our hands around this technology.
No, well
yeah.
said. And I was laughing
One.
though. Oh, go
Sorry.
ahead, Jens.
No,
No,
it's
go
fine.
ahead. No, because I actually forgot my question.
Okay. So we're a graphical vendor, and I think this wouldn't be a good podcast without a graphical roast. So I'm curious from your perspective, if we take REST APIs and we add an LLM, we have a query language, right? We can query the REST APIs. So in the age of LLMs, do we actually need GraphQL, or is it like a dead thing?
Well, like I said, I don't think technology actually dies after it reaches a certain level of, widespread adoption. It sticks around forever. Um, I think we've gone on a roller coaster with GraphQL, where it comes out, and then a lot of people are saying this is the only thing I ever need for the rest of my life is GraphQL. I don't need anything else. And then I think we've kind of settled down to a point of saying, okay, here are GraphQL's strengths, and here's where I need GraphQL, and here's where I need other kinds of APIs. Right? Instead of being a complete replacement for everything, it became additive. And LLMs, I think, are similar. Like we're not gonna, and MCP is similar. Like we're not going to replace everything with this new technology. It's going to be additive, and we just need to figure out where it really fits in. There are certainly, folks who are exposing GraphQL through MCP now, and so you can like, uh, do queries and mutations through a natural language interface.
Yeah, well said. I also like you could tell very well that you're a very good consultant because you're always like, it depends. Let me understand the use case first. And you go in first by saying, well, it always depends. And like whenever like we talk to a consultant, he has a very strong opinion on something. I'm like, well, you don't know the full use case. So I really appreciate the it depends type.
Well,
You
it's
know
it's
the
frustrating to tell people it depends, right? So,
But it
uh,
does.
yeah.
No, well said. Yenza, you had another
you, you,
question?
like my and this is just something, I don't know. I think hopefully every developer they learn it in their career at some point, but I think every developer with enough experience, it's like uh, you stop having extremely strong opinions on something, because there's always someone who knows one particular topic better. Like you're either like extremely broad in your knowledge, or you're deep in some specific topic. So if you're deep in one topic, you won't know other topics as deep. If you're broad, there's people who are more deep on one topic. And so I think in general, like one of the traits I had as a young developer, this probably from this Dunning-Kruger thing. There's this Mount Stupid. I love to refer to that. You learn a little bit about a topic, like early Jens learns about GraphQL, knows everything about GraphQL, and then your hammer to solve every problem is GraphQL now. So you keep only talking about that, and until eventually you run into like an enterprise architect who I don't know who sets you back, and he's like, dude, this is just one of the many tools we're using, and relax. And you kind of realize that, okay, that's, I don't know. Did you also have like a Mount Stupid moment where someone kicked your ass and you kind of realized, okay, I didn't know everything?
Oh, I mean, constantly. Which is why I think my attitude and my approach is so different now than when I was younger. I would be like, oh, I think I have it all figured out. And then someone's like, oh, well, you don't understand all of these design patterns, or you don't know the solid principles or whatever. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'll go learn those. And then I'm like, now I've got it all figured out. And then folks are like, well, this is too complex for what you need. Like, why do you have a factory? Like, just stop, just stop that. Like, it's too complex. And I was like, oh, so like they always end up being in the middle. There's that like bell curve meme, right? Where you start everything simple and everything's great, and then everything becomes really super complex. And then you go back to things being really simple
Yes.
again. And I think that there's a lot of truth in that, and it's interesting to have like early career folks in your network, and to kind of see them go through this experience of being like, oh, I was so naive, and now I have it all figured out, and here's how everything's going to work going forward. And you're like, oh, sweet summer child, like you're going to have another awakening coming soon.
Yeah,
No, well said.
it's so funny. Like I had this meme in my head while you were talking, and you didn't mention it already, because I was young, and I had no clue I was doing things, and I was reading like clean code, and then I had this phase where everything had to be clean code. And then you get older, and you work on different projects, and you kind of realized that if you go hardcore clean code, you're actually harming your company. Like, it's harmful behavior. Like, you don't need to be hardcore. You need to be a little bit, or a nuanced way of clean code. And in the end, if you go to this down this hill again, you kind of realize some aspects of clean code, they are good, but it's not like, I don't know, it's clean code is one of the many things that matter to you. And it's, yeah, it's, I think we go through this cycle of, we learn something, then we're absolutely crazy about it, and then we normalize. And if you become like this a more experienced developer, you kind of figure out that I would say you're also less excited about new stuff, because you already kind of know, like, yeah, okay, like, it's LLM is a new thing, but in the end, it's also just an LLM, and like everything else also matters. So I think this is why you see like older developers, they
It
calm down a
depends.
little bit.
It depends.
Yeah, I think to be effectively pragmatic, you need experience, right? Like, you need to know, well, sometimes I need a hammer, sometimes I need a screwdriver, and then sometimes I got to go, build my own tool to get this done, right? But yeah, it's easy to be more pragmatic when you've got experience over time, and you understand, what patterns and what solutions work for what problems.
No.
This is another thing. When I was like younger, I would always go like, oh, let's buy a $5 droplet on DigitalOcean. It's cheap, and we can with Docker we can run Postgres and everything there. Like, it's cheap and everything. And these days, I would never want to run a Postgres database myself. Like, never. Like, can we just buy something? And have you ever tried, like, we have and there's all these cool vendors. They can deploy your stuff like Render and whatsoever. And I'm not talking negative about any of them, okay? But we have our backend for our platform. It's on Kubernetes. It's on the most expensive tier of GCP Kubernetes, which is some kind of autopilot thing. Like, it's more expensive, but we have this pod or this stuff. We have this running for, I think, more than 2 years, and
Awesome.
not a single glitch, like nothing.
It
You
just
deploy
works.
it works for 2 years. Like, it's insane. And if you understand this, you're like, why try out like a cool vendor or something? Like, all we like, and this is also something like, with WunderGraph, we built cool new tech, but we try to build it on the most boring tech we can
It's
find.
what Kevin
like,
said. Yeah.
the things we want to use are we want to, like, we don't want a fancy database. We want the most boring Postgres, and it just like make the problem go like, and this is, I don't know, if you build for long enough, you're kind of realizing I just want the boring stuff because it doesn't break apart, and you stop trying out like vendors like Fly, where, I don't know, suddenly your deployment disappears and you don't know why, and the support doesn't answer, or you've gone through those kind of scenarios, and then you realize, you know what, we just take GCP Kubernetes and call it a day.
Stability is really comforting, right? Like, using tools that aren't boring means they're probably going to have a breaking change come through at some
Yeah.
point, which is fine if you're taking advantage of some new features or something new that's really core to what you're doing. But especially with infrastructure, people want boring infrastructure, because they don't want to wake up at 2 a.m. and hear that everything went down.
No, well
Yeah.
said. And
the hardest thing, like, or the one thing like nobody wants to have is you don't want to have a vendor and every week you get a Slack notification that something is wrong, or even worse, it just blows up. Like, customer calls you, hey, your service is down, and your vendor didn't even wasn't even able to tell you. Like, these are the scenarios. Like, this happens 3 times and you just switch away, and I think that's also, like, there's some funny stuff going on between database vendors. And I think next week we actually have a database guy on the podcast, Stefan, right?
Yeah, so a good segment, guys. So we are at time. So Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Jens, the
Thank
good
you.
thing is we're back next week. Next week we're back with Sam Lambert, so CEO of PlanetScale. And if you've been seeing the Twitter drama, which is funny, but PlanetScale does insane uptime, 100%. Cloudflare, GCP goes down, PlanetScale is untouched, and so. But other than that, we'll have them next week. Kevin, this was a fantastic episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Go get your morning coffee. Next time that we have you on the podcast, we're going to do it at a little bit of an easier time for you. But thank you again so much for joining us.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.